Well, thank you, Paige. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us to polish your ability to make wise, reserve decisions. But before we dive into today's content, let me tell you what brought me here today. It's this 71-unit association in Southern California. Some of you who know my background know that shortly after buying into this association in 1982, as a young professional, I became president at my first homeowners meeting when the president just up and resigned. And as I was the only homeowner in the meeting, everyone looked at me and asked if I'd like to be the new president. I said, sure, thinking, how hard could this be? If someone can up and quit, I should be able to up and stand in their place and take over. And the situation was I was a new owner, a young professional, a mortgage up to my eyeballs. I needed a roommate to be able to pay all my bills. And I bought a condo because it was the only home on the market I could afford. And I wanted to get on the path of owning real estate and seeing my investment appreciate. I was tired of paying rental dollars. Well, at the end of the meeting, the treasurer came over to me and privately told me that the association didn't have hardly any money. It was surviving month to month, and the roof had started leaking in the prior year. So this association that I had become a member of and now the president of was in a financial jam. And it was hard to believe that I'd potentially bought into a home that was full of problems and going to cost me a lot of money I didn't have. So 3 years later, after a lot of hours rallying the owners and passing a special assessment, I ended up selling my condo for a healthy profit. I got enough of a profit that I could buy a fixer-upper standalone home of my own. And that was the right thing to do after those 3 years. And I learned enough lessons about what got associations into this kind of financial jam and how to get out of that kind of jam that I launched Association Reserves. So settle in so Chip and I can share some of these lessons with you to help you guide your association or the associations you manage safely, successfully, and responsibly into the future. And it all starts out with appreciating that the community association concept of home ownership itself is fragile. It relies on untrained volunteer leaders, the participation of owners to vote, and then reliance on those same owners to fund anything and everything at the association. They all signed that they would become a member of the association and pay their fair share. And as I learned, owning real estate is expensive. So community association living is not the carefree living that it has been advertised to be. Mother Nature and Father Time ensure that there are constant financial pressures from ongoing deterioration. And that causes friction between the board, who's trying to lead the organization forward, and owners hanging on to that false premise of inexpensive and carefree community association living that they had in mind when they bought into the association. Well, we lay the foundation of reserve studies in another webinar, Reserve Study Basics, so that we can deal with the advanced concepts in today's webinar. So if at any time you feel like we've skipped over some foundational or basic type information, you can find that webinar, both the recording and the written outline, on our website. You can go to reservestudy.com, select resources, and then webinars, and scroll down. And as you can see, Reserve Study Basics is easy to find. So that's for follow-up if you want to establish the background. Now, today is going to be all advanced tips, but we're going to keep it pretty simple and clear. We want you doing more of putting checks in the good column, things that you're doing at the association, and less red X's in the bad column. And that's going to be your scorecard through today's program. So first, let's deal with rejection to the concept of reserve studies. You see the typical excuses here. What's it good for? It's just a bunch of guesses. Why should I pay for something that I'm not going to follow? I don't want my dues to go up. Standard responses. So what do you do with all that? Well, I start with the first green good check mark. Be careful in your communication. A reserve study doesn't define the costs. Mother Nature and Father Time define the costs. A reserve study just lays out the plan to deal with those costs. Without a reserve study, the homeowners are going to pay the same costs just by moving from one special assessment to another. And with a reserve study that lays out the cost of ongoing deterioration evenly and fairly, owners pay their fair share of that ongoing deterioration on a regular budgeted monthly basis, fairly carrying their share over the time they own a home in the association and avoiding special assessments that might fall on future owners, like happened to me at my first condo. Now, the reserve study profession is built on national reserve study standards that define component selection, calculations, and terminology. A reserve study prepared according to national standards will provide good guidance, providing a funding plan that provides for the inevitable projects in your association's future. It provides for sustainability. And after the tragic collapse of Champlain Towers South back in 2021 in Florida, national best practice was updated to recommend a with site visit reserve study update at least every third year. Okay, every third year. Some of you have been in the practice of every fifth year or even a longer interval in between. What we find is every third year is a great sweet spot for associations. Now, think about it. For a budget line item, reserve funding, that is typically one of your largest, usually 15 to 40% of your total budget, getting a regular update on how big that ongoing deterioration bill is for your association, a bill that's as real as any other bill that needs to be paid, is a responsible plan. It's responsible to get an update to what you should be doing. So with that foundation to what we'll be doing today, at this point in time, I'll hand the microphone over to Chip, who will help you from a former manager's point of view. Chip.
Thanks, Robert. And hello, everyone. Over the course of my 20 years in community management, I've seen so many things and could tell so many stories of successes and failures, particularly as it relates to funding reserves and planning for a secure future. But what I want to provide today are just some tips that can help lead to success. The first is avoiding putting off the important task of updating your reserve study. It's easy to look back on the last few years with the high inflation we have experienced and understand that a roof replacement cost from 5 years ago is not what a roof is going to cost today. You need to base your planning on accurate information. Old information does not provide good guidance. The next mistake is to avoid delaying repair or replacement projects. You don't generally save money by delaying a project. You still need to do it. And often it costs more because it needs additional work. Remember that old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound to cure? Look at this wood siding area. By delaying painting at a couple of dollars a square foot, now it needs to be replaced at $15 to $25 or $20 a square foot. Another common mistake I see is spending reserves carelessly. I have often seen new board members just join the board and seeing a pretty exorbitant amount of money that in their mind in their balance sheet on what the reserves hold, seeing $100,000 or $1 million or even more in reserves. And they think, great, no problem with giving staff a raise or an end-of-year bonus or redecorating the lobby this year, because I never liked the color, or to add a pickleball court at the side of the community center. While all of those are worthy ideas, and speaking for staff, absolutely, I want that raise and I want that year bonus.
Good for you.
They should be accommodated with other funding sources, however. Using reserves to supplement regular operating expenses or capital improvement projects can have real negative consequences down the road. Reserves are funds set aside for a specific purpose. Every one of those dollars has a job to do. They are not available to be spent on non-reserve projects. The flip side of that problem is neglecting budgeted reserve transfers or making only partial reserve transfers. The roof and the asphalt, they just go, yeah, right, when they laugh at that thinking. They're deteriorating on schedule no matter if your budget is tight or not. Deterioration is unstoppable. Skipping required reserve funding only leads to further headaches and problems down the road. Another mistake too often being made is by being casual with your investments. We see two specific mistakes all too often. One is associations letting their reserves grow over the $250,000 FDIC insurance limit, leaving them at risk of loss and not maximizing your interest earnings. Nowadays, that's no excuse. When interest rates were 1%, if you were lucky, the interest income was pretty negligible. But now you can put that money to work and get 4 or 5% interest on your reserves. And you should. 4% on $250,000 is $10,000. 4% on $750,000 is $30,000. That's real money that your homeowners don't have to pay into reserves because the bank is paying it. So don't make the mistake of missing out on tens of thousands or even more dollars in supplemental investment income. And it's easy. There are companies like HOAinvest.com that specialize in helping associations safely manage and maximize their reserves. You can also look at the CAI website to look at partners that are associated, mainly banks and others, that also have specialized funding sources for associations as it applies to reserves or even special capital projects. Finally, in this list is a mistake we see condo associations making all too frequently. A condo association needs to be setting aside at least 10% of the total budget for reserve funding in order for mortgages in the association to be Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac qualified. Being Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac qualified is important as it allows homeowners to get the most attractive mortgage terms available. Low interest rates on mortgages can mean higher home prices. So being Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac qualified boosts those prices. And you do that by dedicating at least 10% of a condo association's annual budget towards reserves. But keep in mind, that's condo associations. Most associations, including condos, need to set 15 to 40% of their budget aside towards reserves to offset deterioration. So 10% is the floor, and it's usually inadequate. Therefore, failing to set aside at least 10% towards reserves is a big mistake on two levels. Remember the goal: enough funding to do your projects on time. Green check mark. How do you win? Another green check mark if you collect the funds and spend it wisely. Now there are rules to be considered. I just mentioned winning, so you should know the rules of the game. There are actually two sets of rules: reserve rules and board member rules. First, reserve rules. Expenses are inevitable. Remember what Robert said earlier about Mother Nature and Father Time. The board is responsible to manage expenses and pay the bills of the association. The delays of doing projects means the projects regularly get more expensive, and the homeowners always get stuck with the bills. You're never doing the homeowners a favor by ignoring the reality of expenses and delaying projects and sticking your head in the sand from Mother Nature and Father Time. Again, the homeowners always get stuck paying. The other set of rules relate to the business judgment rule, the principles by which board member decisions will be measured, or in some uncomfortable situations, adjudicated. In order to be defensible, board member decisions need to be made in good faith, which means they are loyal to the needs of the association over their own personal interests. They were acting in the best interest of the association and through making prudent, informed decisions. Board members are elected and managers are hired to act in the best interest of the association as a whole, without regard for individual interests, such as keeping assessments artificially low to save money and be a hero in the neighborhood. They do so by following the governing documents and providing quality services and care for the association. care for the association. Additionally, board members can't be expected to be experts in everything, but they are expected to ask questions and seek help when they don't know the answer. We are here as reserve study providers to provide guidance, helping board members make wise, what we call, in this exercise, green checkmark decisions. So you may be asked, are your reserves adequate? The definition below is from the 2023 updated National Reserve Study Standards. It's a combination of the reserve size and a stable and equitable funding plan that provides for all the reserve projects to be accomplished on time without reliance on special assessments or loans. That's adequate. So it's a combination of enough funds and reserves now and enough continued funding of reserves to offset deterioration so the projects get done on time without reliance on future extraordinary sources of funding. All right, let's turn the corner a bit to the funding obligation. It's an ongoing race. The funding keeping up at the rate at which things are deteriorating. But there are always ways to minimize homeowner funding requirements. The first, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, is to put the funds to work and help supplement reserves in a meaningful way. That means maximizing your interest earnings and minimizing your risk of losing funds by exceeding the FDIC $250,000 insured level in any one financial institution. The second is to execute projects on time, which eliminates expensive deferred maintenance when the scope and cost of a project goes up and up because there's more age or more damage. The third is a nuance that most people get completely wrong. They think that associations with a strong reserve fund have the highest reserve funding requirements. That's really not it. That's wrong. Actually, the opposite of what the truth is. Remember that the costs don't change. They are what they are. Associations with low reserve funding make up for it in special assessments or loans. Associations with a weak reserve fund regularly have to set aside much more than their fair share, which we will call in catch-up mode, not catch-up, to make up for reserve funding not done by prior owners. Their rate of reserve funding is high simply because they need to rapidly set aside funds in order to prepare for big upcoming projects. Associations with a fair or strong reserve fund are already prepared, so their rate of reserve funding is smooth, stable, and lower. Let me say that again. Associations with a strong reserve fund have lower reserve funding requirements than associations that have fallen behind. Think of it like this. You're approaching a freeway. The traffic is moving by at 60 miles an hour, and you're doing 30 miles an hour. If you have a short on-ramp, you have to hit the gas hard, or just the accelerator pedal for electric vehicles, to accelerate to get up to speed to safely merge into traffic. But if you have a long on-ramp, you can gradually get up to speed without the pressure of excessive acceleration. And now you can look at this chart, and I like all the green check marks that we've given to you. But I've got one more. That's how to save on your reserve study itself. You can, of course, pay us for a full reserve study, which means to create one from scratch. It's very time-consuming and very expensive. Can be very expensive. But with regular with-site visit updates every third year, it's not as big a project for your reserve study professional. It is significantly less expensive than in every 5-year or, God forbid, even more years pass, and it's less frequently have a reserve study update. And the cost of having updates with no site visit at all in those in-between years can be trivial. But in those regular updates that keep your reserve funding on track, and it's those that you can that help you accomplish your reserve projects on time. Remember, that's what winning the game looks like when we mentioned that a few minutes ago. Now for some tips on saving on your spending. If you save on your spending, your reserve funding requirements will automatically be lower. But first, what doesn't save money? Stalling or delaying projects. Maybe in some cases, like a recreation room heater, water heater that doesn't get used that often or rarely noticed. You can save money by not doing that project, but that is rare. In most cases, all you're doing is stalling the expense. It still needs to be accomplished, and you risk the project getting more expensive by stalling. So in general, you have to be careful about stalling or delaying a reserve project, and it doesn't yield much benefit or value anyway. Another idea is to spend from the operating account instead of reserves, or vice versa. Let's be real. Cash for every expense comes from the homeowners, no matter what source it comes from, either operating or reserves. A good idea is to perform your projects efficiently by coordinating projects together. If you have, for example, the flooring installer lay the hallway carpet and the emergency exit stairwell carpet at the same time, that saves them time, which lowers their bid price. Same with doing interior remodel projects, like a clubhouse or a common room remodel all together, or having a painter do all your accent painting at the same time. When you save them money, such as mobilization costs or buying products in bulk rather than individual broken down components, you lower their bid price. And think long term. Develop a good relationship with your vendors, such as your plumber, your painter, roofer, pool service company, whatever. Be a good account for those vendors. From a business perspective, a good account always gets the most favorable pricing. Discuss projects with vendors far in advance, so it's convenient for them. You don't have to squeeze into a tight schedule or not be scheduled at all. Pay them on time. Act like a responsible corporation or business, which, in essence, you really are, and reap the benefits of same. Finally, take good care of your assets. Preventive maintenance, projects done on schedule to care for the community, have two big benefits. First, the place looks nicer, increasing pride of ownership and property values. And second, every dollar spent on preventative maintenance lowers your reserve funding by that much, and up to 50% more. So for every $1,000 spent on preventive maintenance, it saves between $1,000 and $1,500 on your reserve funding. Your major components last longer, and the repair or replacement projects are less extensive and expensive. Robert, back to you.
Fantastic. Hey, thanks, Chip. I like the idea of adding more and more of those green checks and less of those red X's. Great ideas to add up. Well, I'm going to wrap up our program today with a little bit of teaching on some miscellaneous advanced concepts before we bring the program to a close. First, working with reserves day professional, we have some people who say, I'm concerned about how much I communicate with them because I don't want to overly influence their independence. Well, we're here to help guide you towards having enough cash to do your projects on time. We need to hear from you to know the facts, cost and history of when you perform various projects. We also like to know what's on your mind, how we can help you execute your vision for priorities, which projects you've communicated are influential to the community. So don't worry about communicating with us or only answering specific questions. We want to learn from you and help stand right beside you in moving the association forward. And remember that interest is good, but also remember that interest is only earned on the money you actually have in the reserve fund. If you are very underfunded and you don't have much cash, that just means you're not going to earn much interest. And even if you are well-funded, remember that that money is constantly growing towards those different replacement cost timelines. An upcoming paint project, an upcoming roof project, an upcoming elevator project. And it's always going to be far less than the total cost of any of those projects because you're constantly growing the cash in the bank. So the total cost of all projects is growing with inflation. That total cost is always growing. And that's always going to be a bigger number every year. So interest is never going to completely offset and pay for inflation at the association. Interest is nice to have, but don't ever have the false idea that maximizing interest is going to effectively make inflation go away. And I had to put some more green check marks on this page to finish off strong. These are things to do in your best interest. And the first is always characterize reserve funding as the cost of ongoing deterioration. Okay? You have this ongoing deterioration. Make it sound like a bill. Don't characterize it as contributions. That sounds like it's voluntary. The deterioration bill is as real as any other bill. It doesn't go away if you ignore it. And do your reserve funding steady and smoothly through the years, offsetting deterioration so every owner pays their fair share over the time they own a home in the association. And finally, focus on reserve funding being a multi-year plan. Some years, your reserve expenses might be zero, and your reserve funding exceeds the expenses. Some years, like maybe a roof year or a painting year, your reserve expenses are going to exceed the reserve transfers going in. So make sure that you're seeing it all in a multi-year perspective. Many of your costs are far away, years away. But if you're taking care of the present this year, offsetting ongoing deterioration, the future is going to take care of itself. The funds will grow to be there when needed. And another advanced concept is the idea that you can now test changes to your reserve study. It's no longer just here's your reserve study document that you have, and you have to say, oh, gee, okay, good. What do I do? And am I stuck with their assumptions? We have an online reserve calculator called UPlanet loaded with your reserve study information that our clients have access to throughout their budget season after the reserve study has been delivered. So they can test changes to the starting balance, moving some expenses around, testing different interest values, testing some different funding plans, all in order to help you make more informed decisions. That's an advanced concept. We want to put that power into your hands, no longer just sitting and waiting for that reserve study and then reading the document. You get to UPlanet exactly the same way you log on to our Client Center to see your completed reserve study. To see your completed reserve study, you log on and click Documents. To see UPlanet, you just click on the UPlanet tab. So with it, you can do all your testing. It's basically your reserve planning sandbox to play in with the numbers already there so you can see what happens. UPlanet solves that whole concept of, well, what do we want to do if we want to make some adjustments due to other things we forgot to tell you about or something new that's come up. Budgeting is hard enough. And now you have a simple but powerful tool to test your ideas, make some changes, tweak a few things, and see how significant all those changes might be. And that's the truth. Budgeting is hard enough. We don't want you to have the same experience I did when I joined the board at my association, finding the prior boards didn't plan ahead and left us with a bag full of problems. A leaky roof with no money to pay for it, kind of like Aspen Creek condos that you see in the slide here. The decisions you make today are going to shape the future of your association, and they're going to influence the property values of all the homes within the association. And the key here is that you put in the hard work as a board member to see your own equity increase because you care about your home. You want it to be well taken care of. But your hard work leverages increases in home values for every other homeowner in the association. And that may be some of the most valuable work you do on a dollars per hour basis. It's raising home values for everyone in the association. For me, it was 70 other homes that increased in value along with mine. And remember from the business judgment rule, the third rule is to reach out when you don't know the answer. So don't think that you have to do it all or know it all. We're here providing you some resources to help you. But remember, it's always your job to reach out for help. We're here to help. Other reserve professionals are here to help. We're here to help you in the field of reserve planning, helping you collect the right amount of cash so that you can get your big common area repair and replacement projects done on time. And we have a deep library of additional resources on our website, reservestudy.com. There, you'll find articles, videos, policy templates, and more. You can get a no-cost reserve study proposal by clicking on the link at the upper right corner of our homepage. And you can sign up to get notified of future webinars like this one by scrolling to the bottom of any page. And we also have another resource. It's a great book called Understanding Reserves, available for purchase on Amazon. It's a great desktop reference of reserve study basics and some of the advanced concepts we discussed today. I'll include a link to a free download of Chapter 1 in the outline of today's program so you can get a flavor of how that book is written and if it suits your interests. And finally, one more resource is our weekly 30-minute podcast for board members called HOA Insights, Common Sense for Common Areas. It's designed to encourage and equip board members on a weekly basis by profiling some board heroes, interviews with industry experts, insights on current events, and more. You can subscribe from any of the more podcast platforms, listen from the show's website, hoainsights.org, or on our YouTube channel. And like almost every podcast, it's free. Board members, I think you'll like it and find it a real home in that community of other board members. And managers, feel free to send your board members there to get regular training, encouragement, and reinforcement in the best practices that you've been telling them all along. And with that, I'll bring our prepared comments to a close and turn the microphone over to Paige, who will coordinate our Q&A time together.